handed in, the documents in the document book are in the order in which I shall refer to them, and the references in the brief to the document are in that same order. On the first page of the brief is set out the extract from the indictment, that Appendix A, which deals with the allegations against this defendant. It sets out the positions he held and charges him first with promoting the preparations for war set forth in Count 1, secondly with participating in the military planning and preparation for wars of aggression and wars in violation of international treaties, agreements, and assurances set forth in Counts 1 and 2 of the indictment, and thirdly with authorizing, directing, and participating in the war crimes set forth in Count 3 of the indictment, including particularly the crimes against persons and property on the high seas. Lord, if at any place I appear to trespass on Count 3, it is with the consent and thanks to the courtesy of the Chief Prosecutor for the French Republic. Lord, at the second page of the brief are set out first the positions held by the defendant Doenitz. And the document in question is the first document in the document book 2887 PS, which has already been put in as United States Exhibit number 12. Members of the Tribunal will see that after his appointment in 1935 as commander of the Weddigen U-boat flotilla, that was in fact the first flotilla to be formed after the end of the World War in 1918. The defendant, who was in effect then commander of U-boats, rose steadily in rank as the U-boat arm expanded until he became an admiral, and then on the 30th of January 1943 he was appointed Gross Admiral and succeeded the defendant Raeder as Commander-in-Chief of the German Navy, retaining his command of the U-boat arm. Then on the 1st of May of 1945, he succeeded Hitler as head of Germany. Lord, as appears from a number of documents which I shall put in evidence, the defendant was awarded the following decorations. On the 18th September 1939, the cluster of the Iron Cross, first class, for the U-boat successes in the Baltic, during the Polish campaign. This award was followed on the 21st of April 1940 by the high award of the Knight's Cross to the Iron Cross, whilst on the 7th of April 1943 he received personally from Hitler the oak leaf to the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross as the 223rd recipient. For his services in building up the German Navy, and in particular the offensive U-boat arm for the coming war, were outstanding. And on that, I put in the next document in the document book, D436, which becomes GB183. That is an extract from the official publication, Das Archiv, on the defendant's promotion to Vice Admiral. It's dated the 27th of September, 1940. And I read the last two sentences. In 4 years of untiring and in the fullest sense of the word, uninterrupted work of training, he succeeds in developing the young U-boat arm personnel and material till it is a weapon of a striking power unexpected even by the expert. More than 3 million gross tons of sunken enemy shipping in only 1 year achieved with only a few boats speak better than words of the services of this man. The next document in the document book, 1463 PS, which I put in as GB184, is an extract from the diary for the German Navy, the 1944 edition, and it serves to emphasize the contents of that last document. Lord, I won't read from it. The relevant passage is on page 2, and if I might summarize that, it describes in detail the defendant's work in building up the U-boat arm, his ceaseless work in training night and day to close the gap of 17 years during which no training had taken place. His responsibility for new improvements and for devising the tactics which were later to become so famous. And then it's summarized, the position is summarized further at the top of page 3. If I might read the last two sentences of the first paragraph on that page. In spite of the fact that his duties took on unmeasurable proportions, since the beginning of the huge U-boat construction program, the chief was what he always was and always will be, leader and inspiration to all the forces under him. And then the last sentence of that paragraph: in spite of all his duties, he never lost touch with his men, and he showed a masterly understanding in adjusting himself to the changing fortunes of war. It was not, however, only his ability as a naval officer which won the defendant these high honors. His promotion to succeed the defendant Raeder as Commander-in-Chief of the Navy, the personal position he acquired as one of Hitler's principal advisors, and finally, earlier candidates such as Goering, having betrayed Hitler's trust or finding the position less attractive than they had anticipated, the doubtful honor of becoming his successor. These he owed to his fanatical adherence to Hitler and to the party, to his belief in the Nazi ideology with which he sought to indoctrinate the Navy and the German people, and to his masterly understanding in adjusting himself to the changing fortunes of war, referred to in the diary, and which the tribunal may think, when I have referred them to the documents, may be regarded as synonymous with a capacity for utter ruthlessness. His attitude to the Nazi Party and its creed is shown by his public utterances. Turn to the next document in the document book, D443, which I put in to become GB185. It is an extract from a speech made by the defendant at a meeting of commanders of the Navy in Weimar on the 17th of December, 1943. Was subsequently circulated by the defendant as a top-secret document for senior officers only, and by the hand of officers only. Lord, if I might read: I am a firm adherent of the idea of ideological education. For what is it in the main? Doing his duty is a matter of course for the soldier. But the whole importance, the whole weight of duty done, are only present when the heart and spiritual conviction have a voice in the matter. The result of duty done is then quite different to what it would be if I only carried out my task literally, obediently, and faithfully. It is therefore necessary for the soldier to support the execution of his duty with all his mental, all his spiritual energy, and for this his conviction, his ideology are indispensable. It is therefore necessary for us to train the soldier uniformly, comprehensively, that he may be adjusted ideologically to our Germany. Every dualism, every dissension in this connection, or every divergence, or unpreparedness, imply a weakness in all circumstances. He in whom this grows and thrives in unison is superior to the other. Then indeed the whole importance, the whole weight of his conviction comes into play. It is also nonsense to say that the soldier or the officer must have no politics, nor the word perhaps there is a mistranslation, I'm told. The sense does not require it. The soldier embodies the state in which he lives. He is the representative, the articulate exponent of this state. He must therefore stand with his whole weight behind this state. We must travel this road from our deepest conviction. The Russian travels along it. We can only maintain ourselves in this war if we take part in it with holy zeal, with all our fanaticism. Not I alone can do this, but it can only be done with the aid of the man who holds the production of Europe in his hand, with Minister Speer. My ambition is to have as many warships for the Navy as possible, so as to be able to fight and to strike. It does not matter to me who builds them. Lord, that last sentence is of importance in connection with a later document. The tribunal will see, when I come to it, that the defendant was not above employing concentration camp labor for this purpose. Lord, I put in the next document in the document book, D640, which becomes GB 186. It's an extract from a speech on the same subject by the defendant as Commander-in-Chief of the Navy to the Commanders-in-Chief on the 15th of February 1944. Lord, it is cumulative, except that I think the last two sentences add. If I might read them. From the very start, the whole of the officer corps must be so indoctrinated that it feels itself co-responsible for the National Socialist state in its entirety. The officer is the exponent of the state. The idle chatter that the officer is non-political is sheer nonsense. Now, the next document is 287 PS, 2878, which I put in to become GB 187. It consists of three extracts from speeches. The first is from a speech made by the defendant to the German Navy and the German people on Heroes' Day, 12th of March 1944. German men and women, what would have become of our country today if the Führer had not united us under National Socialism, split into parties, beset with the spreading poison of Jewry, and vulnerable to it, and lacking as a defense our present uncompromising world outlook? we would long since have succumbed to the burdens of this war and been subject to the merciless destruction of our adversaries. Lord, the next extract is from a speech to the Navy on the 21st of July, 1944. It again shows the defendant's fanaticism. It is perhaps worth reading the first sentence. Men of the Navy, holy wrath and unlimited anger fill our hearts because of the criminal attempt which should have cost the life of our beloved Führer. Providence wished it otherwise, watched over and protected our Führer, and did not abandon our German fatherland in the fight for its destiny. And then he goes on to deal with the fate which should be meted out to these traitors. The third extract deals with the introduction of the German salute into the armed forces. I don't think I need read it, but as members of the tribunal will see, it was the defendant Keitel and this defendant who were responsible for the alteration of the salute in the German forces and the adoption of the Nazi salute. Together with Goering, I should have said. The defendants Goering, Keitel, and Doenitz. The next document is a monitored report of the speech made on the German wireless by this defendant announcing the death of Hitler and his own succession. It is D444. I put it in to become GB 188. I might read a portion of it. At the time is 2226 marked on the document. I read from there. It has been reported from the Führer's headquarters that our Führer Adolf Hitler has died this afternoon in his battle headquarters at the Reichschancellery, fighting to the last breath for Germany against Bolshevism. On the 30th of April, the Führer nominated Grand Admiral Doenitz to be his successor. The Grand Admiral and Führer's successor will speak to the German nation. And then the first paragraph of the speech. German men and women, soldiers of the German armed forces, our Führer Adolf Hitler is dead. The German people bow in deepest sorrow and respect. Early he had recognized the terrible danger of Bolshevism and had dedicated his life to the fight against it. His fight having ended, he died a hero's death in the capital of the German Reich, after having led an unmistakably straight and steady life. Well, there again, I'm afraid there's an error in the translation. It should read, an unmistakably straight. Well, then, that document also contains an order of the day issued by the defendant which is very much to the same effect. Apart from his services in building up the U-boat arm, there is ample evidence that the defendant, as officer commanding U-boats, took part in the planning and execution of aggressive war against Poland, Norway, and Denmark. The next document in the document book, C126C, has already been put in as GB 45. It's a memorandum by the defendant Rader dated the 16th of May, 1939, and I would call the attention of the tribunal to the distribution. The sixth copy went to the Führer der Unterseeboote, that is to say, to the defendant Doenitz. The document deals with it's a directive for the invasion of Poland, Fall Weiss. And I won't read it, it's already been read. The next document, C126E, on the second page of that same document, has also been put in as GB 45. It again is a memorandum from the defendant Rader's headquarters. It's dated the 2nd of August, 1939. It's addressed to the fleet and then flag officer U-boats. That's, of course, the defendant. And it is merely a covering letter for operational directions for the employment of U-boats to be sent out to the Atlantic by way of precaution in the event of the intention to carry out Fall Weiss remaining unchanged. The second sentence is important. Flag officer U-boats is handing in his operation orders to SKL, it should be. That is the Seekriegszeitung, the German Admiralty. To SKL by the 12th of August, ink note, a decision on the sailings of U-boats to the Atlantic will probably be made at the middle of August. The next document, C172, I put in as GB 189. It consists of the defendant's own operational instructions to his U-boats for the Operation Fall Weiss. It's signed by him. It's not dated, but it's clear from the subject matter that its date must be before the 16th of July of 1939. I don't think the substance of the document adds, purely an operational instruction. Giving effect to the document already put in, C126C, the directive by Rader. Lord, the next document, C122, has already been put in as GB 82. It is an extract from the war diary of the Naval War Staff of the German Admiralty, dated the 3rd of October, 1939, and records the fact that the Chief of the Naval War Staff has called for views on the possibility of taking operational bases in Norway. It has already been read, and I would merely call the Tribunal's attention to the passage in brackets in the paragraph marked D. Flag Officer U-boats already considers such harbors extremely useful as equipment and supply bases for Atlantic U-boats to call at temporarily. Now, the next document, C5, has already been put in as GB 83. This is a paper by the defendant as Flag Officer U-boats addressed to the Supreme Command of the Navy, the Naval War Staff. It's dated the 9th of October, 1939, and it sets out the defendant's views on the advantages of Trondheim and Narvik as bases. And the document proposes the establishment of a base at Trondheim with Narvik as an alternative. Now, the next document, C151, has already been put in as GB 91. It is the defendant's operation order to his U-boats for the occupation of Denmark and Norway, and the operation order, which is top secret, dated the 30th of March 1940, is termed Hartmut. Members Tribunal will remember the document, and the last paragraph sets out that the naval force, as they entered harbour, would fly the British flag until the troops had landed, except presumably at Narvik. Now, his knowledge of the preparations for war against England is perhaps best shown by the disposition of the U-boats under his command on the 3rd of September 1939, when war broke out between Germany and the Western Allies. The locations of the sinkings in the following week, including that of the Athena, which will be dealt with by my learned friend, Mr. Elwyn Jones, provide corroboration. So on that, I would put in two charts. I put them in as D652, and they become GB190. Lord, I have copies here for members of the Tribunal. They've been prepared in the Admiralty in London. There are two charts. The first in the book is marked A, and that sets out the position of the submarines on the 3rd of September. There is a certificate attached to the chart in the top left-hand corner, which I should read. This chart has been constructed from a study of the orders issued by Doenitz between 21st of August 1939 and 3rd September 1939, and subsequently captured. The chart shows the approximate disposition of submarines ordered for the 3rd of September 1939. It cannot be guaranteed accurate in every detail, as the files of captured orders are clearly not complete, and some of the submarines shown apparently received orders at sea on or about September the 3rd to move to new operational areas. Documents from which this chart was constructed are held by the British Admiralty in London. Lord, the 2 points I would make on that first chart. First, it will be apparent to members of the tribunal that U-boats which were in those positions on the 3rd of September of 1939 had left Kiel some considerable time before. The other point which I would make is important in connection with my learned friend Mr. Elwyn Jones's case against the defendant Radar, and that is the location of the U-boat U-30. Members of the tribunal may care to bear it in mind when looking at the chart now. The second chart sets out the sinkings during the first week of the war and the location of the sinking of the Athena will be noted. There is a short certificate in the left-hand corner of the tribunal's copies. This chart has been constructed from the official records of the British Admiralty in London. It shows the position of sinking of the British merchant vessels lost by enemy action in the 7 days commencing the 3rd of September 1939. Lord, I turn to the defendant's participation in war crimes and crimes against humanity. The course of the war waged against neutral and Allied merchant shipping by the U-boats followed under the defendant's direction a course of consistently increasing ruthlessness. The defendant displayed his masterly understanding in adjusting himself to the changing fortunes of war. From the very early days, merchant ships, both Allied and neutral, were sunk without warning, and when operational danger zones had been announced by the German Admiralty, these sinkings continued to take place both within and without those zones. With some exceptions in the early days of the war, no regard was taken for the safety of the crews or passengers of sunk merchant ships. And the announcement claiming a total blockade of the British Isles merely served to confirm the established situation under which U-boat warfare was being conducted without regard to the established rules of international warfare or the requirements of humanity. The course of the war at sea during the first 18 months is summarized by 2 official British reports made at a time when those who compiled them were ignorant of some of the actual orders issued, which have since come to hand. Now I turn to the next document in the document book. It is D641A, which I put in to become GB 191. It's an extract from an official report of the British Foreign Office concerning German attacks on merchant shipping during the period 3rd of September 1939 to September 1940. That's to say, the first year of the war, and it was made shortly after September 1940. Or if I might quote from the second paragraph on the first page. During the first 12 months of the war, 2,081,062 tons of Allied shipping, comprising 508 ships, have been lost by enemy action. In addition, 769,213 tons of neutral shipping, comprising 253 ships, have also been lost. Nearly all these merchant ships have been sunk by submarine, mine, aircraft, or surface craft, and the great majority of them sunk while engaged on their lawful trading occasions. 2,836 Allied merchant seamen have lost their lives in these ships. In the last war, the practice of the Central Powers was so remote from the recognized procedure that it was thought necessary to set forth once again the rules of warfare, in particular as applied to submarines. This was done in the Treaty of London 1930, and in 1936 Germany acceded to these rules. The rules laid down: 1. In action with regard to merchant ships, submarines must conform to the rules of international law to which surface vessels are subjected. 2. In particular, except in the case of persistent refusal to stop on being summoned, or of active resistance to visit and search, a warship, whether surface vessel or submarine, may not sink or render incapable of navigation a merchant vessel without having first placed passengers, crew, and ship's papers in a place of safety. For this purpose, the ship's boats are not regarded as a place of safety unless the safety of the passengers and crew is assured in the existing sea and weather conditions by the proximity of land or the presence of another vessel which is in a position to take them on board. And in the next paragraph, at the beginning of the present war, Germany issued a prize ordinance for the regulation of sea warfare and the guidance of her naval officers. Article 74 of this ordinance embodies the submarine rules of the London Treaty. Article 72, however, provides that captured enemy vessels may be destroyed if it seems inexpedient or unsafe to bring them into port. And Article 73, Sections 1 and 2 makes the same provision with regard to neutral vessels which are captured for sailing under enemy convoy, for forcible resistance, or for giving assistance to the enemy. These provisions are certainly not in accordance with the traditional British view, but the important point is that even in these cases, The prize ordinance envisages the capture of the merchantman before its destruction. In other words, if the Germans adhered to the rules set out in their own prize ordinance, we might have argued the rather fine legal point with them, but we should have no quarrel with them, either on the broader legal issue or on the humanitarian one. In the event, however, it is only too clear that almost from the beginning of the war, the Germans abandoned their own principles and waged war with steadily increasing disregard for international law and for what is, after all, the ultimate sanction of all law, the protection of human life and property from arbitrary and ruthless attacks. Lord, I pass to the third paragraph on the next page, which sets out two instances. On the 30th September 1939 came the first sinking of a neutral ship by a submarine without warning and with loss of life. This was the Danish ship Vendia, bound for the Clyde in ballast. The submarine fired 2 shots and shortly after torpedoed the ship. The torpedo was fired when the master had already signaled that he would submit to the submarine's orders and before there had been an opportunity to abandon the ship. By November, submarines were beginning to sink neutral vessels without warning as a regular thing. On the 12th of November, the Norwegian Arne Kjoda was torpedoed in the North Sea without any warning at all. This was a tanker bound from one neutral port to another. The master and 4 of the crew lost their lives, and the remainder were picked up after many hours in open boats. Henceforward, in addition to the failure to establish the nature of the cargo, another element is noticeable, namely an increasing recklessness as to the fate of the crew. And then, dealing with attacks on Allied merchant vessels, certain figures are given. Ships sunk 241, recorded attacks 221, illegal attacks 112. At least 79 of these 112 ships were torpedoed without warning.
They weren't claimed to have been illegally sunk, however.
Yes, Your Honor.
Purpose of this
Going
paper,
to the next paragraph.
the Germans have been given the benefit of the doubt.
Oh, yes, I should have read that sentence. I'm obliged, Your Honor. Then I pass to the second report, 641B. It's part of the same document, so that it's put in as GB 191. That's a report covering the next 6 months, from September the 1st, 1940.
You're not reading page 3.
If Your Lordship pleases,
No,
I'd read a great deal of the report, and there were passages there I had considered important.
I haven't myself read it, but I think perhaps you...
If Your Lordship pleases, if I might read the first 2 paragraphs on page 3. The first paragraph on it. By the middle of October, submarines were sinking merchant vessels without any regard to the safety of the crews. Yet 4 months later, the Germans were still officially claiming that they were acting in accordance with their prize ordinance. Their own semi-official commentators, however, had made the position clearer. As regards neutrals, Berlin officials had early in February stated that any neutral ship that is either voluntarily or under compulsion bound for an enemy port, including contraband-controlled harbors, thereby loses its neutrality and must be considered hostile. At the end of February, the cat was let out of the bag by a statement that a neutral ship which obtained a Navy cert from a British consul in order to avoid putting into a British contraband control base was liable to be sunk by German submarines, even if it was bound from one neutral port to another. As regards Allied ships, in the middle of November 1939, a Berlin warning was issued against the arming of British vessels. By that date, a score of British merchantmen had been illegally attacked by gunfire or torpedo from submarines. And after that date, some 15 more unarmed Allied vessels were torpedoed without warning. It is clear, therefore, that not only was the arming fully justified as a defensive measure, but also that neither before nor after this German threat did the German submarines discriminate between armed and unarmed vessels. But then the last paragraph is merely a summing up. It doesn't add. Turning to 641B, which is a similar report covering the next 6 months. If I might read the first 5 paragraphs on page 1. On the 30th of January 1941, Hitler proclaimed that every ship with or without convoy which appears before our torpedo tubes is going to be torpedoed. On the face of it, this announcement appears to be uncompromising. The only qualification provided by the context is that the threats immediately preceding it are specifically addressed to the peoples of the American continent. German commentators, however, subsequently tried to water it down by contending that Hitler was referring only to ships which attempted to enter the area within which the German total blockade is alleged to be in force. From one point of view, it probably matters little what exactly was Hitler's meaning, since the only conclusion that can be reached after a study of the facts of enemy warfare on merchant shipping is that enemy action in this field is never limited by the principles which are proclaimed by enemy spokesmen, but solely by the opportunities, or lack of them, which exist at any given time.
Colonel Phillimore, isn't this document you're now reading really legal argument?
Lord, some of it is. The difficulty is to leave those parts and take in the facts.
Very well.
Lord, the third paragraph, if I might leave the rest of the second. The effect of the German total blockade is to prohibit neutral ships from entering an enormous stretch of sea round Britain. The area extends to about 500 miles west of Ireland, and from the latitude of Bordeaux to that of the Faroe Islands, upon pain of having their ships sunk without warning and their crews killed. In the next sentence. As a matter of fact, at least 32 neutral ships, exclusive of those sailing in British convoys, have been sunk by enemy action since the declaration of the total blockade. And then the last sentence in the following paragraph dealing with sinking of merchant ships without warning. Yet though information is lacking in very many cases, details are available to prove that during the period under review, at least 38 Allied merchant ships, exclusive of those in convoys, have been torpedoed without warning in or near the total blockade area. That the Germans themselves have no exaggerated regard for the area is proved by the fact that of the 38 ships referred to, at least 16 were torpedoed outside the limits of the war zone. Lord, the next page deals with a specific case illustrating the matter set out above. It's in the first paragraph on that page. The third sentence. The sinking of the city of Benares on the 17th September 1940 is a good example of this, that is, of the enemy's methods. The city of Benares was an 11,000-ton liner with 191 passengers on board, including nearly 100 children. She was torpedoed without warning just outside the war zone, with the loss of 258 lives, including 77 children. It was blowing a gale with hail and rain squalls and a very rough sea when the torpedo struck her at about 10 p.m. In the darkness and owing to the prevailing weather conditions, at least 4 of the 12 boats lowered were capsized. Others were swamped, and many people were washed right out of them. In one boat alone, 16 people, including 11 children, died from exposure. In another, 22 died, including 15 children. In a third, 21 died. The point to be emphasized is not the unusual brutality of this attack, but rather that such results are inevitable when a belligerent disregards the rules of sea warfare, as the Germans have done and are doing. Well, then I think the rest of that paragraph is comment. Now, I turn to the next document, 641C, which is part of GB 191.
It's clear, I suppose, from that statement of fact that there was no warning whatever given.
No, my Lord.
We think that you should read the next paragraph too.
Lordship, please. There are hundreds of similar stories of voyages for days in open boats in Atlantic gales, of men in the water clinging for hours to a raft and gradually dropping off one by one, of crews being machine gunned as they tried to lower their boats, or as they drifted away in them, of seamen being blown to pieces by shells and torpedoes and bombs. The enemy must know that such things are the inevitable result of the type of warfare he has chosen to employ. Lord, the rest is very much to the same general effect. The next document, 641C, is merely a certificate giving the total sinkings by U-boats during the war, 1939 to 1945, as 2,775 British, Allied, and neutral ships, totaling 14,572,435 gross tons. Lord, it is perhaps worth considering one example, not quoted in the above reports, of the ruthless nature of the actions conducted by the defendant's U-boat commanders, particularly as both British and German versions of the sinking are available. Now I turn to the next document, the sinking of the Chief Mead. That is D644, which I put in as GB192. Or if I might read the opening paragraph. The British Chief Mead was torpedoed without warning on the 27th of May 1940.
This is the German account, is it not?
This is actually in the form of a British report. It includes the German account in the shape of extract, a complete extract from the log.
Are the words top secret? Is that British?
Yes, my lord, this was, at the time, a top secret document. That's some while ago. The Chief Mead was torpedoed without warning on the 27th of May 1940 with a loss of 31 of the crew. The commander of the U-boat responsible is reported to have behaved in an exceptionally callous manner towards the men clinging to upturned boats and pieces of wood. It was thought that this man was Captain Lieutenant Earn of U-37. The following extract from his log for the 27th of May 1940 leaves no doubt on the matter and speaks for itself as to his behavior. And then, turning to the relevant extract from the log on the second page, the time is marked on the document as 15:54 hours. Surface. Stern is under water. This is referring to the ship which has been torpedoed. Stern is under water. Bows rise higher. The boats are now on the water, lucky for them. A picture of complete order. They lie at some distance. The bows rear up quite high. Two men appear from somewhere in the forward part of the ship. They leap and rush with great bounds along the deck down to the stern. The stern disappears, a boat capsizes. Then a boiler explosion. Two men fly through the air, limbs outstretched, bursting and crashing. Then all is over. A large heap of wreckage floats up. We approach it to identify the name. The crew have saved themselves on wreckage and capsized boats. We fish out a boy. No name on it. I ask a man on the raft. He says, hardly turning his head, Nick's name. A young boy in the water calls, help, help, please. The others are very composed. They look damp and somewhat tired. An expression of cold hatred is on their faces. Onto the old course. After washing the paint off the boy, the name comes to light. Greta Glasgow, 5,006 gross registered tons. Onto the old course means clearly that the U-boat makes off. And then the next page of that document contains an extract from the report of the chief engineer of the Chief Mead. The relevant paragraphs are the first and the last. When I came to the surface, I found myself on the port side, that is nearest to the submarine, which was only about 5 yards away. The submarine captain asked the steward the name of the ship, which he told him, and the enemy picked up one of our lifeboats. But this had the name Great Aston on it, as this was the name of our ship before it was changed to Chief Mead last January. But in the last paragraph, I should read just before that the last sentence of the preceding paragraph. She had cut away bows, but I did not notice a net cutter. 2 men stood at the side with boat hooks to keep us off. They cruised around for half an hour, taking photographs of us in the water. Otherwise, they just watched us, but said nothing. Then she submerged and went off, without offering us any assistance whatever.
Is there any suggestion in the German report that any warning was given?
No, Lord. No, Lord, it's quite clear, indeed, that it wasn't. Under the time 1444, there's a description of the sighting of the ship and the difficulty in identifying. And then at the top of the page, the distance apart is narrowing. The steamship draws in quickly, but the position is still 40 to 50. I cannot see the stern yet. Tube ready, shall I or not? The gunnery crews are also prepared. On the ship's side, a yellow cross on a small, square, dark blue ground. Swedish, presumably not. I raise the periscope a little. Hurrah, a gun at the stern, an ack-ack gun or something similar. Fire, it cannot miss. And then the sinking. Now that it is possible to examine some of the actual documents by which the defendant and his fellow conspirators issued their orders in disregard of international law, you may think the compiler of the above reports understated the case. These orders cover not only the period referred to in the reports, but also the subsequent course of the war. It is interesting to note in them the steps by which the defendants progressed. At first, they were content with breaching the rules of international law to the extent of sinking merchant ships, including neutral ships, without warning, where there was a reasonable prospect of being able to do so without discovery. The facts already quoted show that the question of whether ships were defensively armed or outside the declared operational areas was in practice immaterial. Lord, I go to the next document in the document book, C191, which I put in as GB 193, I beg your lordship's pardon. That is a memorandum by the German Naval War Staff dated the 22nd of September 1939. It sets out that Flag Officer U-boats intends to give permission to U-boats to sink without warning any vessels sailing without lights. And reading from the third sentence, in practice, there is no opportunity for attacking at night, as the U-boat cannot identify a target, which is a shadow, in a way that entirely obviates mistakes being made. If the political situation is such that even possible mistakes must be ruled out, U-boats must be forbidden to make any attacks at night in waters where French and English naval forces or merchant ships may be situated. On the other hand, in sea areas where only English units are to be expected, the measures desired by Flag Officer U-boats can be carried out. Permission to take this step is not to be given in writing, but need merely be based on the unspoken approval of the Naval War Staff. U-boat commanders would be informed by word of mouth, and the sinking of a merchant ship must be justified in the war diary as due to possible confusion with a warship or an auxiliary cruiser. In the meanwhile, U-boats in the English Channel have received instructions to attack all vessels sailing without lights. When I go to the next document, C21, I put in as GB 194 Lord, this document consists of a series of extracts from the war diary of the German Naval War Staff, the German Admiralty. The second extract, at page 5, recites a conference with the head of the Naval War Staff. 1. Report by, on the 2nd of January 1940. And then reading 1. Report by 1A. That is the Staff Officer Operations on the Naval War Staff.
Shouldn't you read above that, paragraph 1, 1B?
Yes, my Lord. If your Lordship pleases, it is important. The others are much to the same effect. If I might read it without... Report by 1A, this is 1. Report by 1A on Directive of Armed Forces High Command of the 30th of December. According to this, the Führer, on report of Commander-in-Chief Navy, has decided: A. Greek merchant vessels are to be treated as enemy vessels in the zone blockaded by the United States and Britain. B. In the Bristol Channel, all ships may be attacked without warning. For external consumption, these attacks should be given out as hits by mines. Both measures may be taken with immediate effect. And then the next extract, report by 1A that is the Staff Officer Operations on the Naval War Staff, on directive of Armed Forces High Command, dated 30th of December, referring to intensified measures in naval and air warfare in connection with Fall Gelb. In consequence of this directive, the Navy will authorize, simultaneously with the general intensification of the war, the sinking by U-boats without any warning of all ships in those waters near the enemy coasts in which mines can be employed. In this case, for external consumption, pretense should be made that mines are being used. The behavior of and use of weapons by U-boats should be adapted to this purpose. And then the third extract, dated the 6th of January 1940, the Führer has in principle agreed, see minutes of report of Commander-in-Chief Navy of the 30th of December, to authorize firing without warning whilst maintaining the pretense of mine hits in certain parts of the American blockaded zone. Well, then the order is given to Flag Officer Submarine carrying out that decision. The next extract, dated the 18th of January 1940, adds to some extent, and if I may, I'll read it. The High Command of the Armed Forces has issued the following directive, dated 17th January, cancelling the previous order concerning intensified measures of warfare against merchantmen. The Navy will authorize, with immediate effect, the sinking without warning by U-boats of all ships in those waters near the enemy coasts in which the use of mines can be pretended. Lord, that is an extension of the area. U-boats must adapt their behavior and employment of weapons to the pretense which is to be maintained in these cases that the hits were caused by mines. Ships of the United States, Italy, Japan, and Russia are exempted from these attacks. Well, then there's a note emphasizing the point about maintaining the pretense of mine hits. And the last extract is, I think, purely cumulative. The next document, C118, I put in as GB 195. This is an extract from the BDU War Diary, that's to say the Defendant's War Diary. It's dated the 18th of July 41, and it consists of a further extension of that order by a cutting down of the protected categories. Supplementary to the order forbidding, for the time being, attacks on United States warships and merchant vessels in the operational area of the North Atlantic, the Führer has ordered the following. 1. Attacks on United States merchant vessels sailing in British or United States convoys or independently, is authorized in the original operational area, which corresponds in its dimensions to the United States blockade zone, and which does not include the sea route United States to Iceland. As members of the tribunal will have seen from these orders, at one date the ships of a particular neutral, in certain conditions, could be sunk, whilst those of another could not. It would be easy to put before the tribunal a mass of orders and of instances to show that the attitude to be adopted towards the ships of particular neutrals changed at various times. The point is that the defendant conducted the U-boat war against neutrals with complete cynicism and opportunism. It all depended on the political relationship of Germany towards a particular neutral at a particular time, whether her ships were sunk or not. Lord, I turn to the next document in the document book, D642, which I put in as GB 196. Lord, this is a series of orders. This is the first, I should say, of a series of orders leading up to the issue of an order which enjoined the U-boat commander not merely to abstain from rescuing crews, which is the purport of this order, not merely to give them no assistance, but to deliberately annihilate. Lord, in the course of my proof on this matter, I shall call two witnesses. The first witness will give the court an account of a speech made by the defendant at the time that he issued the order, describing the policy, or his policy, towards the recovery of Allied crews, that it must be stopped at all costs. The second witness is the officer who actually briefed crews on the order. Lord, this document is an extract from the standing orders of the U-boat command. It's an extract from standing order number 154, and it's signed by the defendant. Paragraph E. Do not pick up survivors and take them with you. Do not worry about the merchant ship's boats. Weather conditions and distance from land play no part. Have a care only for your own ship, and strive only to attain your next success as soon as possible. We must be harsh in this war. The enemy began the war in order to destroy us. so nothing else matters.
What's the date of that?
Lord, that order in the copy we have is not dated, but a later order, number 173, which was issued concurrently with an operational order dated the 2nd of May, 1940. So the tribunal may take it, this is earlier than the 2nd of May of 1940. So that is a secret order.
Earlier than May 1940.
Earlier than May 1940. It was, however, in 1942 when the United States entered the war with its enormous shipbuilding capacity that the change thus brought about necessitated a further adjustment in the methods adopted by the U-boats under the defendant. And the defendant was guilty of an order which intended not merely the sinking of merchant ships, not merely the abstention from rescue of the crews, but their deliberate extermination. Lord, the next document in the document book shows the course of events. It's D423, and I put it in as GB 197. It's a record of a conversation between Hitler and the Japanese ambassador, Oshima, in the presence of the defendant Ribbentrop on the 3rd of January 1942. The Führer, using a map, explains to the Japanese ambassador the present position of marine warfare in the Atlantic, emphasizing that he considers his most important task is to get the U-boat warfare going in full swing. The U-boats are being reorganized. Firstly, he had recalled all U-boats operating in the Atlantic. As mentioned before, they would now be posted outside United States ports. Later, they would be off Freetown and the larger boats even as far down as Cape Town. And then, after further details, after having given further explanations on the map, Führer pointed out that however many ships the United States built, one of their main problems would be the lack of personnel. For that reason, even merchant ships would be sunk without warning, with the intention of killing as many of the crew as possible. Once it gets round that most of the seamen are lost in the sinkings, the Americans would soon have difficulties in enlisting new people. The training of seagoing personnel takes a very long time. We are fighting for our existence, and our attitude cannot be ruled by any humane feeling. For this reason, he must give the order that in case foreign seamen could not be taken prisoner, which is not always possible on the open sea, U-boats were to surface after torpedoing and shoot up the lifeboats. Ambassador Oshima heartily agreed with the Führer's comments and said that the Japanese, too, are forced to follow these methods. Lord, the next document, D446, I put in as GB 198. I don't propose to read it. It's an extract from the BDU War Diary of the 16th of September 1942. And it is part of the story in the sense that it was on the following day that the order I complain of was issued. And the defense will no doubt wish to rely on it. It records an attack on the U-boat which was rescuing survivors, chiefly the Italian survivors, of the Allied liner Laconia when it was unfortunately attacked by an Allied aircraft. Lord, the next document, D630, I put in as GB 199. It contains 4 documents. The first is a top-secret order sent to all commanding officers of U-boats from the defendant's headquarters, dated the 17th of September, 1942. Paragraph 1. No attempt of any kind must be made at rescuing members of ships sunk. And this includes picking up persons in the water and putting them in lifeboats, righting capsized lifeboats, and handing over food and water. Rescue runs counter to the rudimentary demands of warfare for the destruction of enemy ships and crews. 2. Orders for bringing in captains and chief engineers still apply. 3. Rescue the shipwrecked only if their statements will be of importance for your boat. 4. Be harsh, having in mind that the enemy takes no regard of women and children in his bombing attacks on German cities. Now, Lord, that is, of course, a very carefully worded order. Its intentions are made very clear by the next document on the page, on that same page, which is an extract from the defendant's war diary. And I should say there that, as appears from the copy handed into the court, the war diary is personally signed by the defendant Doenitz. This is the war diary entry for the 17th of September 1942. The attention of all commanding officers is again drawn and I would draw the tribunal's attention to the word again, to the fact that all efforts to rescue members of the crews of ships which have been sunk contradict the most primitive demands for the conduct of warfare by annihilating enemy ships and their crews. Orders concerning the bringing in of the captains and chief engineers still stand. The last two documents on that page consist of a telegram from the commander of the U-boat Schacht to the defendant's headquarters and the reply. Schacht had been taking part in the rescue of survivors from the Laconia. Telegram from Schacht, dated the 18th of September 1942, 163 Italians handed over to Annamite. Navigating officer of Laconia and another English officer on board. And then it goes on setting out the position of English and Polish survivors in boats. The reply, sent on the 20th, action as in wireless telegraphy message of the 17th of September was wrong. Boat was detailed to rescue Italian allies and not for the rescue of English and Poles. It's a small point, but of course detailed means before the bombing incident had ever occurred. And then for the next document, D663, that was issued late and may not yet have been inserted in the tribunal's document books. It's D663, which I put in as GB 200. So this is an extract from an operation order, the operation order Atlantic, number 56, dated the 7th October 1943, and the copy put in is part of the sailing orders to a U-boat. As I shall prove through the second witness, although the date of this order is the 7th October 1943, in fact it is only a reproduction of an order issued very much earlier, in the autumn of 1942. Rescue ships. A so-called rescue ship is generally attached to every convoy. A special ship of up to 3,000 gross registered tons, which is intended for the picking up of survivors after U-boat attacks. These ships are for the most part equipped with a shipborne aircraft and large motorboats, are strongly armed, depth-charged throwers, and very maneuverable, so that they are often called U-boat traps by the commander. The last sentence, in view of the desired destruction of ships' crews, their sinking is of great value. What if I might just sum up on those documents? it would appear from the war diary entry of the 17th of September that orders on the lines discussed between Hitler and Oshima were in fact issued, and that we haven't captured them. It may be that they were issued orally. And that the defendant awaited a suitable opportunity before confirming them in writing. The incident of the bombing of the U-boats detailed to rescue the Italian survivors from the Laconia afforded the opportunity, and the order to all commanders was issued. Its intent is very clear when you consider it in the light of the war diary entry. Lord, the wording is, of course, extremely careful. But to any officer of experience, its intention was obvious, and he would know that deliberate action to annihilate survivors would be approved under that order. You will be told that this order, although perhaps unfortunately phrased, was merely intended to stop a commander jeopardizing his ship by attempting rescue, which had become increasingly dangerous as a result of the extended coverage of the ocean by Allied aircraft. And that the notorious action of the U-boat commander Eck, sinking the Greek steamer Peleus and then machine gunning the crew on their rafts and in the water, was an exception. And that although it may be true that a copy of the order was on board, this action was taken solely, as he himself swore, on his own initiative. I would make the points to the tribunal that if the intention of this order was to stop rescue attempts in the interest of the preservation of the U-boat, first of all, it would have been done by calling attention to Standing Order 154, secondly, this very fact would have been prominently stated in the order. Drastic orders of this nature are not drafted by experienced staff officers without the greatest care and an eye to their possible capture by the enemy. Thirdly, if it was necessary to avoid the risks attendant on surfacing, not only would this have been stated, but there would have been no question of taking any prisoners at all, except possibly in circumstances where virtually no risk in surfacing was to be apprehended. Fourthly, the final sentence of the first paragraph would have read very differently. fifthly, that if in fact, and the prosecution do not for one moment accept it, the defendant did not mean to enjoin murder, his order was so worded that he cannot escape the responsibility attaching to the issue of such a document.